What's up, everybody? This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Nick Whalen here with Brandon Kravitz. No Jeff Erickson today. He is still gallivanting around the shores of Alabama on what sounds like an incredible golf trip for Jeff. So we wish him the best of luck out on the course. Brandon, appreciate you hopping in for our Wednesday episode. We'll be talking start sit. We'll be taking a full look at the week 2 slate. A little bit of a look back at how our week 1s went as well. And before we dive in, I want to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor, Underdog. We're so proud to partner with Underdog Fantasy again this NFL season. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. In addition to their popular best ball contest, which if you're watching the show, you've probably played best ball before. Underdog also offers great DFS pick'em games. You can pick whether your favorite players will have higher or lower on a stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. You can win up to 1,000 times your money. 1,000 times in a single game by picking between 2 and 8 players to build a pick'em entry. I've been firing off a ton of those Underdog pick'em games, basically for any standalone game. For the Sunday slate, it's even better. You got all these options to choose from. They're always updating live. You could do in-game pick'em as well. Just really fantastic stuff if you want to supplement the season-long fantasy. And right now, if you sign up over at Underdog, you use our code RWNFL, you get a free pick plus a first-time deposit bonus up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com, where you can just find them in the App Store. Don't forget to register with our promo code RWNFL to claim your free pick and that first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 or older to play. You got to be 21 in Massachusetts and Arizona. You got to be 19 in Alabama and Nebraska. And, of course, present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. All right, Brandon, a lot to dig in on as we piece our way through week 2. I want to ask you, first of all, though, how did week 1 go for you? Obviously, a lot of disappointments in terms of some of the elite receivers. None of the elite tight ends really came through for us. Shout out to Kyle Pitts for at least salvaging somewhat of a fantasy day with a touchdown. But, still some major questions to be answered. But what was the fallout for you coming out of week 1?
Super flex went well. Anything beyond that was pretty atrocious this week. I had a situation where I went into Monday night. Unfortunately, was Jordan Mason was on the roster bubble going into the year in a league where I have Christian McCaffrey. Mm-hmm. And despite the advice that I would give to anybody else, which is hang on to him if you've got McCaffrey, I decided that he wasn't good enough for my roster, and I decided to cut him before the season started.
Oh boy.
And then I had no other option on Monday night. All of the players on my bench had already played, so those guys are locked. You can't drop them and pick up somebody else. Thankfully, and this will probably be the only time this year I say this, I was already down by 50, and as good as Christian McCaffrey is, I don't think he was going to get me the win anyway. So just took the goose egg like a man and moved on. I would say overall week 1 was pretty disastrous for me, but I'm excited to watch everybody else freak out and panic, and I'll just try and steady the ship here moving forward.
Yeah, I would say week 1 was like a solid B for me. Across all my leagues, I think I probably went about 500, and would have been over 500. But I had one league where I was up, I think 20-ish, right around 20 going into Monday night, with going up against just the 49ers defense and Jake Moody, and I think Moody alone pushed that one over. That was one of those classic. It's like, oh, you have a 82% chance to win the matchup. I'm like, this doesn't feel like 82%, especially with each passing field goal from Moody, but. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough break on Jordan Mason. Obviously, a lot of people, we're in tough spots there with it being a Monday night game, especially if you didn't have McCaffrey in a flex spot, you're kind of up against it. Speaking of McCaffrey, by the way, it doesn't look like he's going to be available in week 2. The 49ers will probably be a little bit more transparent because there's going to be some public pressure on them to do so going forward. But, Ian Rappaport was on NFL Network yesterday, said it's, quote, a long shot for McCaffrey to play in week 2 against Minnesota. There's some concerns, about McCaffrey coming back, playing on artificial turf. I get that. Week 3, they play at the Rams. That's an artificial turf game as well. I mean, this could very easily be a situation where, week to week for these first few weeks of the season, there's a lot of question around Christian McCaffrey. I wouldn't be shocked if he misses the first 3 games.
I wouldn't either. I think, I mean, you've already heard it. He's a long shot to play. I'd be shocked if he did, especially when you consider what the injury is. It's Achilles tendonitis. And just doing some Dr. Google research yesterday, not surprisingly, this is a precursor to tearing your Achilles. And that's obviously takes you out for the year, but it's a killer to anybody that creates that sort of momentum off their back foot. And Christian McCaffrey certainly does. I do wonder how much of this had to do with his workload last year, or if this was just him strenuously training for 2024, and he put himself in a position where his Achilles is compromised going into the season, or maybe it's a mix of those two things. This is the type of injury that that long distance and sprinter type runners usually get, and McCaffrey puts that kind of stress on his body. So if you have Jordan Mason, you should be grinning ear to ear, and you should hope that McCaffrey doesn't play this weekend. The last thing you want is a running back who's aging, coming off of the workload he had last year with Achilles tendonitis, to run out there so that he can give you 20 in week 2. This is a bigger picture play if you have McCaffrey, as long as you have Mason. If not, if you don't have Jordan Mason, you're sitting at 0-1, Nick. You're pretty scared about what is to come here.
Yeah. It's, I don't know if it's the Madden curse. I don't know if it's just the curse of no running back, being the RB1 in back-to-back seasons since, I believe, LaDainian Tomlinson, at the end of the, 2 decades ago, I guess, at this point. McCaffrey has the history too, right? I mean, most of it dates back to his Carolina days. It kind of feels like these last 2 seasons have erased a lot of that. But, these are the concerns that we have with McCaffrey on a weekly basis early in his career. He was always, a per game god and still continues to be. But, he's somebody that's been banged up. And as you get closer and closer to age 30, that's something that can obviously return. And, the 49ers are in a unique spot where it's like if Christian McCaffrey was on any other team, it feels like there'd probably be a little bit more pressure. It's like, all right, we got to get this guy back. We got to get him right. I mean, as we saw on Monday night, it's like this team is somehow just fine without perhaps the best player in the NFL. So not a ton of pressure on McCaffrey to get back anytime soon. 49ers understandably playing the long game. Your team, Brandon, the Miami Dolphins, also has some injury concerns, specifically at running back as it pertains to Thursday night football. Short week for Miami. They're hosting the Buffalo Bills. Dolphins are 2.5-point favorites right now, according to ESPN Bet. We know for sure that Raheem Mostert won't be out there. A lot of questions around Devon Achane as well. Mike McDaniel this morning essentially saying that Achane is going to be a game time call. So taking Mostert out of the equation, that's 31 snaps from last week that are gone. We saw Jeff Wilson fill in as kind of the third running back, played about 11 snaps last week. So he's the guy in theory that I think is kind of next up, but a lot of Jalen Wright excitement as well. So what is your read on the Dolphins situation right now?
Yeah, I would use last year as a nice baseline of understanding of how this works. Jeff Wilson getting the third run at running back really doesn't tell you anything. Devon Achane was not the third running back to start the season last year, and he zoomed up that depth chart once they needed him to do so. So I would just keep that in mind. For those that have Mostert that are rushing to go get Jeff Wilson, I get it. He is the safer option, but Jalen Wright just simply has more upside. We saw that in the preseason. This guy bounces off of tackles like he's a bowling ball, and he's got that tremendous speed that he displayed at Tennessee. So that's the type of running back that will likely get you what you're looking for as far as starting somebody in that backfield. It's hard to trust either one on Thursday night, though. You're talking about a short week where Jeff Wilson's upside is capped because I just don't think he's a great player. Jalen Wright's is through the roof, but is it through the roof for Thursday? I don't think the answer to that is yes. It's a tough call. Yeah. I really wouldn't want to start either of those guys.
Yeah, obviously we got to get some clarity on Achane, which we will get, at the very least 90 minutes before Thursday's game. But does it concern you at all that Miami actually struggled to run the ball on Jacksonville, which, maybe that's an improved defense, obviously bringing in Eric Armstead to pair with Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines-Allen. It's a more formidable, I think, defensive front, than you might think. But it was a little bit alarming. The Dolphins had to rely on those big plays through the air from Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and even Achane himself, who had 7 for 76 as a pass catcher. But Achane went 10 for 24 on the ground against that Jacksonville team. I mean, I know there's some injuries along the Miami offensive line, but we're used to Mike McDaniel and this Miami team, coming out with a bag of tricks, ripping off big plays right away. It was a little bit alarming to not see that be the case. Do you think that changes tomorrow night?
Yeah, it was a little alarming, especially for yours truly, who played the Devon Achane over 52.5 yards rushing, and he had a great game, but it wasn't in the rushing department. The good news for Miami is that they use their pass game as part of their run game. A lot of Tua's passes are right around the line of scrimmage, so whether that's to the running backs, and we saw Achane do damage, or to those electric wide receivers, they can still create yards from the line of scrimmage without having to do the traditional run between the tackles kind of play like you would typically see. The only reason why I'm not totally panicking off of this or overrating Jacksonville's defense as far as from a rush defense perspective is that I think that the stats that we saw were a little bit game script dependent. Your squad went up big early, and Miami kind of had to get away from the game plan. They were playing comeback for the majority of that game. They didn't put up a single point in the first half. There was a lot of rust there. By the time they get to the second half, and Jacksonville goes up 17-7, well, now you're in catch-up mode. You can't sit there and run the football. I think they started to panic a little bit, got away from the run. So I'm not sure that that's all that indicative of what their rush offense is going to look like.
All right, let's talk about some specific matchups in week 2. And I want to go to Green Bay, where the Packers have their home opener in the noon window. I am very concerned about what this offense is going to look like with Malik Willis. Very, very, very concerned at how limited this could be. The Packers they're leaving the door open for Jordan Love to play. If you kind of piece through what Matt LaFleur has said, I would be very, very surprised if Love is out there. But he's been very careful to say, if Jordan isn't cleared, it'll be Malik Willis. I think it's going to be Malik Willis for at least 1 week. Total in this game is at 40.5. Colts are 3-point favorites. How worried are you about starting someone like Jaden Reed, even, who you almost feel obligated to start, right? Based on 1, where you drafted him, 2, what we saw from him last week. I mean, am I too low on Malik Willis? Is there a way that he could, kind of create a couple of big plays, game manage this to a degree where Jaden Reed or, Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, you're probably not starting Dontavian Wicks this week. He didn't really do anything with Jordan Love at quarterback in a pretty decent situation last week against Philly. But are you vacating your roster of Green Bay players preparing for the worst?
No, I'm having a hard time holding on to Dontavian Wicks, period.
Right.
Definitely not startable in the limited opportunities that he had. He couldn't hold on to the ball, and we can't blame the field on that in Brazil. And then a massive quarterback downgrade. So he's a hard guy to roster right now. Jaden Reed, I'm still putting in my starting lineup. This guy was tied for wide receiver 1 this week with Cooper Kupp. So you've got to put a little bit of stock into that. Also, the way that they use this guy in the run game, I know he only had 1 carry, but it was 33 yards and a touchdown. Yeah. Matt LaFleur is going to go back to that, and it's not like this is a 1-game blip. They used him on those jet sweeps last year, so he doesn't even need if that were all he produced for you, not a great day, but it's not like it's a dud performance and you regret starting him. So even if you did get a couple of explosive plays in the run game from Jaden Reed, and I think as bad as Malik Willis is, he still has the ability to hand the ball off to Reed. He's still startable. Josh Jacobs, because they're going to lean on him, and we saw Joe Mixon against this Colts defense absolutely crush them. I think those 2 guys are still startable. Everybody else is going to have to ride the bench.
Yeah, no, Jeff in his value meter for this week, he's got Jaden Reed at 33 among receivers, which I think is fair. Kind of puts him in more flex territory. Christian Watson at 44. Dobbs, to me, I probably keeping him out of the lineup if I can. And like you said with Wicks, didn't really see a ton from him last week. Still holding out hope for Dontavian Wicks. I mean, it's only 1 week. He had a couple of drops.
But do you need to hang on to him right now? Because Willis is probably going to be the starter for the next couple of weeks. I think you could play that game if you really like the options that are out there on the waiver wire. You can probably just target him a week before Love comes back and put him back. I don't think people are rushing to go add Dontavian Wicks.
That's true. I mean, as always with questions like this, it depends on who your other receivers are, right? It's like if you don't have a whole lot of great options, I would just hold Dontavian Wicks. But no, you're right. I don't think there's going to be a rush in the short term. Although, if this only ends up being a 1-week injury for Jordan Love, which is in the cards, maybe you would regret that. Ultimately, though, Dontavian Wicks was somewhat of a lottery ticket, right? He's probably the wide receiver 4, and at least he looked like the wide receiver 4 for this team, going through week 1. And there's really no offense in the NFL that could support 4 wide receivers. So it's going to be more week to week, I think, with Dontavian Wicks. If you do drop him, there's going to be 2 or 3 times where you're like, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. But on balance, there's probably going to be more weeks where you wouldn't have started him anyway. Couple good questions coming through in the chat as far as start sit goes. DBen22 says Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones, George Pickens, or Lad McConkey for his flex spot this weekend. My initial choice here would be Jordan Mason. What say you?
Yeah, I tend to lean in that direction too. It's a great problem to have. I like all of these players, and I think they all showed a little bit of something in week 1. But if that Niners offensive line is going to open up these, I mean, those were like Atlantic Ocean size holes they were opening up for Jordan Mason in that game. I don't think Minnesota is a great defense. Don't be fooled by what they did against the Giants. I think a lot of teams will be looking like that. They'll look like the 85 Bears against New York. But Mason has to be the option here. If he's at number 1, there's nobody else for them to lean on. So he is a hashtag bell cow, and that is certainly what you're looking for in this world.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's just Mason versus Jones, on either side of that game, I would rather have Jordan Mason. I think you look at what San Francisco was able to do against that Jets defense. And, maybe we overrated the Jets defense, but, 49ers scored on 6 straight drives, after those stumbles early on with a couple of punts. It should be a step down in competition, frankly. You got to go on the road at Minnesota. We'll get into this later, Brandon. I'm a little scared of how many favorites I like this week. We're going to have to discuss, some dogs that we like, because it is a favorite heavy week. I think, from an ATS perspective, and the Niners are on that list for me based on how they looked last week. But yeah, I would go Mason over Jones. I mean, Pickens to me, we know what it's going to be, right? It's going to be feast or famine, much like it was last week. You look at Justin Fields' passing chart, literally nothing over the middle, not even an attempt anywhere near the middle of the field. Still found a way to hit Pickens for some difficult catches down the field. I really like this matchup for Pittsburgh. With that said, I think we saw the blueprint for the Steelers last week. It's like, if they're okay winning games with 6 field goals early on, if that's what they have to do, that's what they will do. And I think against Denver, you don't have to be overly aggressive, right? I mean, if you watch that Denver-Seattle game last week, Seattle got off to one of the worst starts I have ever seen a team get off to. 2 safeties, a pick on the second play of the game, a muff punt inside the 15-yard line. They handed 10 points to the Denver Broncos, and midway through the third quarter, they're up 2 scores. And you don't want to overreact to that necessarily. You don't want to just bank that and say, all right, Denver's just a terrible team. Bo Nix did lead a nice touchdown drive to ruin the cover late in the game. But, if you watch a lot of those snaps for Bo Nix, I mean, he had probably 5 passes that could have been picked off. And, we'll see on the Seattle defense. I think they'll be better than last year. But based on what we saw from Pittsburgh in Atlanta, I think this could be a really, really good spot for Pittsburgh to kind of put the clamps on Bo Nix. I think we get another low-scoring game. And I don't know that the Steelers, need a ton of George Pickens involvement. I don't know how possible that is with Justin Fields at quarterback.
And that's the issue. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the Steelers played in 1 or 2 games this year where one of the 2 teams that are in that game end up with more than 20 points. That's the kind of style that they're going to have to play. Now, George Pickens can still have his big games, but when you have good options like that individual did, I'm not rushing to throw George Pickens in my lineup. 31% target share, so it is what we thought he would get coming into the season, where it is George Pickens and nobody else in that pass game. But between the quarterback play and just the style in which they want to play, it's hard to force him in there.
Yeah, it certainly is. Hard to feel great about any of the Denver options as well. It's, like Jaleel McLaughlin was somebody I was like, maybe I'll grab him in some deeper leagues. And he had 5 catches last week, but for, I believe, 1 yard, was basically just getting slammed behind the line of scrimmage every single time he touched the ball. And there's going to be a learning curve for Bo Nix, right? I think a lot of people fell in love with the efficiency in the preseason, and he can make the short throws. He can make the first read throws. Anything downfield, was a complete disaster in week 1. I don't think that changes against Pittsburgh.
Doesn't that feel like every quarterback right now? If you just looked at week 1, all these quarterbacks, with the exception of a very few, really good at that short and intermediate stuff and just struggled beyond that. Kyler Murray, I don't think he completed a pass beyond 10 yards the entire game. And that was a game where they were winning most of the time against Buffalo. It's like Anthony Richardson throws the ball 60 yards on every attempt, and everybody else is just dink and dunk, especially the rookies.
Yep, you're right about that. All right, before we move on, got a message from our friends at Verse Fantasy. why wait all season to win in fantasy? With Verse Fantasy, you can cash in every week. Download the Verse app, sync your fantasy league, and start wagering and winning today. Verse Fantasy is the new way to play fantasy. There's no need to draft a new team or bring your league to a new platform. Simply sync your current league from ESPN, Sleeper, or Yahoo into the Verse Fantasy app and instantly get money lines and spreads for your league's matchups that week. Playing fantasy for fun, it's cool, but playing for real money, that's the future. Play for real money on your own underdog lines and place contest entries between primetime games to bet on your own comeback. Verse will even show you your odds for winning the title or being crowned the Sacco, every player's nightmare. Enter the arena with Verse Fantasy and use our promo code ROTO, that's ROTO, to get a 100% deposit match up to $50 when you sign up. We're also brought to you by FanDuel. NFL kickoff is here. FanDuel is giving away a special new user offer to RotoWire fans. Sign up, bet $5 on any FanDuel market, and receive $200 in bonus bets, plus 3 free weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket. Just go to sportsbook.fanduel.com or download the FanDuel Sportsbook app in the App Store today to claim that offer. All right, Brandon. I want to touch on Browns-Jags real quickly. This is a big-time stay away for me. I do not trust either of these teams. I think Jacksonville is emerging as one of the worst coach teams in the NFL. Nobody in their right mind feels like they should be betting on Deshaun Watson right now. I don't like this game at 3. It's a total stay away. It feels like maybe a 3-point game either way to me. But for fantasy purposes, Cleveland to me is a tough team to evaluate. I thought they'd be in a better spot last week against Dallas. They fell behind early, kind of had to get away from the run. A little alarming, the degree to which they were not able to generate anything downfield. Obviously, a lot of that is on Watson. Watson was also under a ton of pressure, took some sacks that, a couple of probably didn't need to take. Others, he had no chance whatsoever. Browns were without their 2 starting tackles last week. I think if they get Jedrick Wills and or Jack Conklin back, it's a much better script for the Cleveland Browns. But where are you at on Watson right now? It's like, is this just kind of a point of no return? Like, I'm not going to touch this guy. He's kind of damaged goods as far as, even what it means for other players in that offense.
Yeah, and I think it's a relief to all of us because here we are again where he's got sexual assault accusations looming, and this just, we play fantasy football to escape the ills of the world, and Deshaun Watson is bringing that into our beautiful landscape of fantasy football, but he's terrible. So it doesn't really impact you. He's not somebody you want to start. He's not somebody you want to bet on. I would back your Jacksonville Jaguars. I agree. I don't know what happened to Doug Peterson. The fact that this guy could win a Super Bowl with Nick Foles at quarterback, to me, he was good forever. But how you mismanage a talent like Trevor Lawrence is beyond me. And Trevor Lawrence has his own issues, but Peterson is not helping. Their last 3 drives against Miami, he attempted 1 pass. 1. Like, how does that happen? It's so confusing watching him play. The first half, he looked as brilliant as promised coming out of Clemson, and then in the second half, he just disappears. Some of that's on him, but some of that is on coaching. So I'm with you. There are question marks about Doug Peterson. All that said, you give me that Jags defense that I think is for real. That Miami offense is one of the best in the NFL, maybe the best, and they made them look pedestrian at times. Outside of that Tyreek Hill 80-yard touchdown, gifted them a drive after that Travis Etienne fumble, which I think kind of rattled the defense too. So, but I believe in the Jags and what they can do. I have no faith in the Cleveland Browns, no interest in backing them. So to me, it's Jags or nothing, and it's a hard time trusting anybody on that Browns offense too.
Yeah, fumble of the year so far by Travis Etienne, which
that was crazy. I mean, he might have handed the job to Tank Bigsby with that one.
I'm a little bit reticent on Tank Bigsby. I know he was more efficient. I know they used him more in week 1, certainly than they did at any time last year. And I think he's going to have a role here. I don't think this is a situation where Travis Etienne's job is in danger. I think him, not having an 85% snap share like he did for half of last season, like that's not happening. But that was always the plan. I don't think you want to work Travis Etienne to the bone like they did for much of last season. But yeah, I mean, if he fumbles twice in the next 2 weeks, yeah, maybe we have that conversation. But I still think Etienne is the guy. This offense has always run best when Etienne is going, and it's good to have a second option. That's for sure, because they didn't have anything close to that last season. Yeah, the Lawrence thing is interesting. Every single Jags game now, if you're on Jags Twitter like I am, unfortunately, it just devolves into like a 50-50 split of Some people saying Trevor Lawrence played a perfect game. The coaching staff blew it. Travis Etienne blew it. And the other half saying, why is Trevor Lawrence immune from criticism? If he's supposed to be this good, they should be winning these games. They basically took the ball out of Lawrence's hands in the second half. They came out with an amazing aggressive script early on. Lawrence is slinging it around. I mean, that touchdown to Brian Thomas, insane throw by Lawrence. If you look at, where Thomas was in his route at the time that Lawrence released that ball, I mean, that is a high level NFL throw. He only attempted 7 passes in the second half. He took 2 sacks, on essentially their final drive of the game where he had no chance on either play. They're trying to move the ball deeper down the field. 2 huge drops for Christian Kirk. The play calling is a huge issue here. And we still don't even know who's calling the plays. We don't even know if it's, Doug Peterson to start and then Press Taylor in the second half. We don't know if that's flipped. We have no clarity whatsoever. No good team ever has had this, it's had like mystery over who's calling the plays. Like the Jags are a mess right now from that perspective. And I don't think anything's going to change until they actually get some clarity there. I don't know. This is not a game I feel great about either way, but I'm very concerned about, David Njoku, Amari Cooper. Cooper had some opportunities, I thought, in week 1, and, Watson throwing deep. That's really the main issue. Like Watson, he could still complete short passes. He could still complete, the easy ones over the middle. When he has to throw the ball deep, especially if he's moving outside of the pocket, which he was at times when he didn't even need to in week 1, like that's really where the concern is. Like he missed Amari Cooper, who I wouldn't say he was wide open, but hittable shots downfield. And Watson's, he's throwing right, he's throwing left, it's out of bounds, it's short, it's long. There's a lot of things going on with Watson that we don't need to get into, but the confidence is just totally shot.
Definitely feels like the confidence is shot. And here we go, mentioning another quarterback that can't throw the ball deep. What happened to this great position in the NFL? I don't understand. But it does feel like the Jags are built a little bit like the Dallas Cowboys. So the Browns had that much of an issue with Dallas at home. Yeah. What kind of issue do they have with Jacksonville on the road? And I think it's a bigger issue. The Jags' home field advantage is what it is. I mean, in Florida, it's always tough to play this time of year. But the Browns on the road last year were atrocious. They were one of the worst defenses in the league when they traveled away from Cleveland. They were already bad in that first game, and that was at home. Now they travel and go up against the team that has an elite pass rusher in Josh Hines Allen, and they can get after the quarterback. Trevor Lawrence, a lot like Dak Prescott, game in and game out. You have all this talent in the world, but there's question marks. You're always left wanting a little bit more. So it feels like these two teams are very similar in the way that they're built, the way that they're coached. I think Cleveland could have some big-time issues with Jacksonville.
All right, we'll hit a couple questions in the chat here, getting some good start-sit, some good lineup questions here. Albert says, 8-team league. All right, 8-team league, half PPR, 2 wide receivers and 2 flex spots. Which wide receiver do I sit out for week 2 out of the following? CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, Chris Godwin, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, and Jaden Reed. Again, 8-team league. I was going to say, it's a pretty stacked wide receiver room. I mean, you're playing CeeDee, you're playing Collins. I think you're playing Godwin.
I think you keep Reed in there, even with Malik Willis.
Yeah, it's those final 3. It's, you gotta choose one of Harrison, Nabers, and Reed. So you're saying Reed even with Willis?
I think, yeah, because my biggest question marks are with the rookies. And Marvin Harrison Jr., how does he fit into this Arizona offense? Because the answer in week 1 was not at all. Kyler Murray wasn't even looking his way. They schemed up nothing for Marvin Harrison Jr., and it's not like he wasn't getting open. So it was very confusing. Mm-hmm. Maybe they force feed him the ball, so you want to look in that direction. The Rams already came into the season with defensive back injuries, and they had trouble against Jameson Williams in that first game. So if you want to look at it that way, it's what do you trust less? Is it Daniel Jones throwing passes to a wide receiver that was involved in the offense? Or is it Marvin Harrison Jr. not being involved in week 1? Does he get that squeaky wheel treatment? I'm kind of talking myself into Marvin Harrison Jr., but 1 catch, 4 yards is really tough to stomach.
Didn't get a lot of separation. You start to look at some of the tape for Harrison. It was honestly a little bit concerning. You're always worried, like if you sit him out, that week is coming though for him, right? And I think it's a pretty decent matchup against the Rams. Should be a back and forth game. Don't love that Rams secondary that was pretty exploitable, especially against Jameson Williams last week. But also did a pretty good job on Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? We can quibble about giving up some big plays, but we haven't seen a team lock up Amon-Ra St. Brown to that degree in a long time. But yeah, so
but they're different types of wide receivers.
Oh,
so I
for
wonder
sure,
how
yeah.
much does that then make it to where Greg Dortch doesn't have a good game because they would be more similar in
Yeah.
terms of their slot role in that offense.
Yeah, true. True. All right. So you say Reed. I think I might throw Nabers in there. I mean, pretty good matchup against Washington. I mean, this is about as good of a matchup as you're going to
That's
have
true.
all year if you're the New York Giants.
You
And
definitely
obviously
want to start players against the Commanders.
yeah, yeah. So I'd go CD, Collins, Godwin, and Nabers. You would go CD, Collins, Godwin, and Reed. Good quarterback question here from FBU. Start Mayfield or Stafford in a standard league this week. I'll tell you, Jeff has them back to back in the RotoWire Value Meter rankings, which you can find on our site right now. He has Stafford at 13, Baker at 14. It's a total toss up. I actually kind of like both of these guys because we saw the script for the Rams last week. It's like the Rams' horrendous offensive line, which got a PFF grade of 20.4 for pass blocking last week. That was far and away the lowest of the week, maybe the lowest I've ever seen. The second worst pass blocking grade was 44. It's out of 100. I mean, that's how bad things were. They suffered another injury to Steve Avila in week 1. They're not getting Alaric Jackson back this week. Essentially, the Rams had to scheme around this offensive line being so bad that they couldn't really do anything downfield. And it actually worked out okay for fantasy because it was just a ton of quick passes. They couldn't really run the ball on Detroit. I think the question is, how effectively can they run on Arizona? Because if they can get that running game going, we probably don't see another script where they're passing the ball on 11 of their first 12 plays. On the other side of this, I like Mayfield as well. I don't, last week was probably the peak. That might be his best game of the entire year going up against Washington. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers could be down as many as 4 of their top 5 or 6 defensive backs. We know for sure they're going to be down at least 2 starters this week. I think they're going to have a really tough time keeping Detroit off the scoreboard. And I think this is going to be a shootout type of game. If Tampa Bay is going to hang in, they're going to have to throw the ball a ton. So I actually like both spots here. I think I would lean Baker Mayfield. But if you have Cooper Kupp on your roster, to pair with Stafford, maybe that would break the tie. But to me, I would go Mayfield by a hair.
The problem with the Stafford Kupp stack as far as week to week goes is that so much of what Cooper Kupp does is through receptions. And, it's not like you get extra love for that in fantasy at the quarterback position. So
Right.
does it add up enough for that to be a deciding factor? Certainly
I
a
think
thought,
with Kupp
but
specifically it might because of the crazy volume. But no, in general, you're correct about that. You don't get the point per pass to receiver for the quarterback.
For me, it's Baker Mayfield. I'm going to have to disagree with Jeff's rankings here. Hate to do that as I fill in for him. Sorry, Jeff. Maybe I'm not allowed back on the show after this, but and the total in this one is higher, so that's one reason to start. You start thinking about that game script that you talk about. The Lions' pass defense was not good last week. And the last year, these two teams played each other in the playoffs. Baker Mayfield played really well. We see quarterbacks get off to these hot starts, especially quarterbacks that have a lot of continuity in their offense. And I don't know that there's many quarterbacks that have more than Baker Mayfield does. Chris Godwin looked great last week. This team is going to have to throw the ball a ton because Detroit is going to score some points. So I like the confidence that Baker's playing with right now. He's already shown us he can do it against Detroit. The wide receivers look great. Evans, not surprisingly, hasn't dropped off at all, at least 1 week into the season. And we know that the Bucs, it's nice that they have Bucky Irving now, but they're not going to lean heavy on the run. So game script, talent, continuity, the way he looked in week 1, to me, all signs point to Baker Mayfield.
All right, another good QB question here. Kyler Murray or Joe Burrow? This is pretty easily Murray for me. I think the case for Joe Burrow is almost the same case for why you would bet the Bengals in week 2, which is they always play well against the Chiefs. Burrow's 3-1 career straight up against Mahomes. For as bad as they can look in a given week, whenever the Chiefs are on the schedule, this team seems to show up. How much do you buy into that general narrative for this specific week 2 matchup? Like it's very hard to look at how the Chiefs played last Thursday night, know that they're remaining at home. They have a huge rest advantage. Seeing what the Cincinnati Bengals did at home against that New England team, and then say, yeah, I think Burrow could put up 30 points in Arrowhead. Like we've seen the Bengals get off to these slow starts and kind of snap out of it. I get that, but I'm having a really hard time thinking that can just happen again, especially if T. Higgins isn't out there, which seems like a likelihood at this point.
I'm having a hard time from the fantasy angle of this, wanting to get excited about Joe Burrow. From the betting side, I think you have to like Cincinnati +6, given the history that these two teams had and the fact that last week, every single thing that could have gone wrong for the Bengals went wrong. They played bad, but their luck was also not at all in their favor in terms of a touchdown call that did not go their way to Mike Gesicki in the first half, fumbles at inopportune times. I mean, Ramondre Stevenson was breaking tackles at a rate that he never has in his career.
Yeah,
I would think that Cincinnati uses that as a major wake-up call, and it's not difficult to get up for this type of opponent. So they would get up for whoever they played a week after that type of performance, even more so when it's the Kansas City Chiefs, and then you bake in the history that these two teams have. I thought Burrow actually looked okay. The stats don't back that up. I thought Burrow, as far as just his movement in the pocket and arm strength and mobility, like those things that we like about Joe Burrow were there. The chemistry with wide receivers, even with Jamar Chase, was not there. So I'm not when I have another option that I like, and Kyler Murray is certainly that guy, the rushing upside alone kind of tilts you in that favor. I want to be on Cincinnati +6. There's a dog that I like. We're going to get into that conversation in a bit, but Murray has to be the safer play. And honestly, upside probably even. So it's definitely Murray.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, it's a really good matchup as well for Arizona going up against that Rams defense. And, with Burrow, obviously you could see Cincinnati covering that game. Given, the history of the last few years, it wouldn't be shocking, I suppose, if the Bengals won that game outright. I don't necessarily see that being like a smash spot for the Bengals offense. I think if they win that game, it's because they force a couple of turnovers on Mahomes. It's a relatively low scoring game. I actually like the under on 47.5, especially if you think Cincinnati is going to cover that game. Based on what we saw from the Bengals last week, and based on the fact that T. Higgins probably won't be out there, I don't see this being like a 37-31 type of shootout. I think there are mistakes on the Kansas City side that keep this a lower scoring game if you think Cincinnati competes. Bears-Texans is our Sunday night game this week, Brandon, and a really interesting spot all of a sudden. We've seen this line balloon. It was at the look ahead last week was like 3.5 in favor of Houston. It's up to 6.5 now. A lot of that is rooted in some concerns over the Chicago Bears offense. So we could talk about that from a fantasy perspective as well. Not the debut that perhaps we were thinking we would see from Caleb Williams. Looked a little shaky, looked a little jittery, wasn't able to have that same escapability that we saw at the college level, which is not necessarily surprising. I think he's going to be without Rome Odunze, at least for this week. They're calling him week to week with the MCL. Apparently Keenan Allen, who was limping off the field last week, they think he's going to be fine. DJ Moore got banged up. They said he's fine as well. But what do we make of this Bears offense going up against Houston? This game is in Houston.
Yeah, I worry about the Bears offense. I'm not surprised that Caleb Williams got off to a slow start. He's a rookie making his first start. I know he got drafted number 1 overall, and even his situation is better than most number 1 overall picks, but he's still a rookie making his first NFL start. This is not Pac-12 defenses anymore. You saw the arm strength that's there, but that only gets you so far. I mean, you use a basketball reference, he felt like a shooting guard playing point guard. The guy has the talent, but the precision just wasn't there. Playing quarterback, it's nice that you can run around and that you can throw the ball 80 yards, but if you can't lead your teammates to where they need to be at the wide receiver position, then you're not doing your job properly, and that's how you end up 14 of 29, rifling passes that almost get intercepted because the ball bounces off of a would-be receiver. So does that get better? Probably. Does it get better this week against a defensive coach like D'Amico Ryans with all the talent that they have? The Colts gave them fits, so that would give you a little bit of optimism, but the Colts are also a slightly better oiled machine as far as what they have and the way that they utilize Anthony Richardson. I still don't know that they have figured out how they want to play Caleb Williams in this offense, so I kind of want to sit on the sidelines as far as Bears offensive players go until they sort of figure out what their identity is.
Yeah, I mean, DJ Moore, I think you have to start no matter what, because he is DJ Moore. And there is an argument that it can't look as bad as it did last week against Tennessee, but my goodness, man. I will say there were a couple drops. There were a couple weird plays. If Keenan Allen brings in a very, very catchable touchdown, especially for him, We probably feel a little bit better about Caleb Williams' line. We certainly feel better about Keenan Allen's line. He was the leading target getter for the Bears by quite a bit as well. So I think there is still a reasonable floor for Keenan Allen. The Texans side of this, I think it was almost the best case scenario in week 1, right? It's like Joe Mixon has like the highest usage game of his career, piles up 150 plus yards, gets in the end zone. Nico Collins still has a big game. Tank Dell still worked into the mix as the third receiver. Stephon Diggs found the end zone twice. Like this, it almost played out like my NCAA football dynasty teams, Brandon, which thankfully, by the way, you can now change player numbers. Just want to get that out there. That was a big sticking point for me. Yeah, they just added that this week. But, it's like, I'm trying to make sure everybody eats, right? It's like you get to the second half and it's like, all right, well, my star receiver, he's got 3 touchdowns. Let me make sure this guy gets 100 yards. Like, It's not going to be like that every week in Houston.
You don't want them to transfer on you.
Exactly. You don't want them to transfer. They got to get their numbers. Everybody's got to be an All-American. Again, it's not going to be like that every week for Houston, but it was very encouraging to see that breakdown early on. With that said, very weird game script against the Colts. I mean, the time of possession was 40 minutes to 20 minutes in favor of Houston. They ran like 30 more plays. That's not going to carry over every week. Like that was, I think the Colts were very lucky that was a 2-point game. They were very lucky to cover that game because when you look at some of the underlying numbers, you're not going to rely on 3 50-plus yard completions every single week. You put up 22 points with 9 passing completions from Anthony Richardson.
Well, but they might do that though.
Maybe.
That feels like their offense. Run, throw the ball 50 yards, inaccurate intermediate ball. The guy that I'm worried about the most, I don't want to get too far away from the game that you teed up, but Michael Pittman, I'm terrified of him rest of season. They've got all these burners. Alec Pierce was used as a deep threat, which he's very good at. Adonai Mitchell was missed on a couple. That guy is going to have some big weeks coming up within the next month. You can book it. Yeah. But I worry about Pittman because Anthony Richardson is a great deep ball passer. He is horrible at throwing those intermediate routes. And so that's where Michael Pittman eats. I just don't know how he fits in week to week. He's a tough guy to start right now. That game on Sunday night is very interesting. The total's at 45.5. I would tend to lean the under in that one. The Bears defense is the most reliable piece of their team. Yep. I do really like the Texans offense, but it took them a minute to get going. And I think the Bears defensively can do enough to make CJ Stroud look somewhat human.
Think the Bears cover that 6.5?
If I had to bet it right now, I would probably take Houston.
Okay. All right.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to touch that. I'm not ready to touch that game. I'll probably end up chasing come Sunday night. So talk to me then.
All right. Well, we'll address that on the SiriusXM show later tonight when you join us and talk about some week 2 picks. Real quickly, the Smitty says, should I pick up Jeff Wilson Jr.? I would say if you have the capacity to do it, just do it. And we'll get some more clarity before tomorrow night. As long as you're not dropping anyone of real major consequence and you have the ability to add them, I would say do it. For what it's worth, we had a report about a half hour ago. Cameron Wolf, who covers the Dolphins, said Devon Achane was on the practice field, fairly light, more of a walkthrough type of practice, but he was out there and was not in street clothes or anything like that. Was not wearing a non-contact jersey. So there's a pretty decent chance that Achane could be out there. Even in that case, though, without Mostert, we probably still see more Jeff Wilson. So again, if you have the capacity to add him, and who knows, maybe Mostert misses multiple weeks, maybe Achane gets banged up again. That's always in the cards. All right, we'll run through a couple more questions here, Brandon. Rust Maniac says Devonta Smith or J.K. Dobbins at his flex this weekend. Dobbins is playing Carolina, so that's why he is debating.
I mean, I think I would debate it no matter the matchup. I don't know if you agree with this, but I think he might be the biggest riser after week 1 among anybody. Mm-hmm. I'm all in on J.K. Dobbins. He was clearly the RB1 in that offense. We know that Jim Harbaugh wants to ground and pound. Their offensive line looked really good. I thought Herbert looked shaky, which just leans more towards they're going to run the ball a ton. And Dobbins was explosive. His touchdown run was tied with one other running back. I can't remember who it was for the fastest. It was the fastest run of any on Sunday. And that just shows that he's all the way back.
Still got caught from behind by 3 guys.
I don't know how that happens. I saw the explosion. That guy is he's all the way back. He's a star.
Yeah.
Devonta Smith I like, but I think I'd ride with J.K. Dobbins. I kind of want to ride the hot hand here.
I think the Chargers have a very defined way that they want to win games. I think it was very predictable, and we saw it play out almost exactly as a lot of people thought it would in week one, right? Which is when you had to ask Justin Herbert to make some throws, he could make some throws, but this is not the Herbert, throw it 45 times and pile up 350 yards offense at all. It is grind it out. It is win on the ground if you can, especially against inferior teams like the Vegas Raiders. And against Carolina, I don't see why you would veer away from that, right? I mean, this is the ultimate team that I think you can play that conservative style against and have your way, right? I mean, if that works against Vegas, I don't see why it wouldn't work against the Carolina team that, by the way, is without one of two players who matter on that defense now, and Derek Brown.
Yeah, but by the way, I did find the stat. It was 19.92 miles per hour, tying Saquon Barkley for the fastest ball carrier speed by any running back in week one. He did get chased down by 3 players, but that's at the end of his run. And
they must have been the 3 fastest players in the NFL, I guess.
But it was at the end of the run. We're talking about 19 miles an hour at the quickest burst point where he made it through that first level of the defense, and then defensive backs. These guys all run 4.2. Come on.
All right. A couple good start-sit questions here. Bryce says he's got to start 2 out of Josh Jacobs, Najee Harris, Tony Pollard, and JT, Jonathan Taylor. I think you got to start JT, right? I mean, obviously an inefficient week in week 1, but the usage is always going to be there with him. Much better matchup, I think, against Green Bay. The Josh Jacobs piece of this is interesting, right? We talked about how Malik Willis impacts the wide receivers for Green Bay, but what about Josh Jacobs, who I thought looked terrible early in that game against Philly, but did turn it on in the second half, started to see, more of the real Josh Jacobs. Is there a case to be made that I think you could look at this 2 ways for Green Bay, right? It's like the lack of a passing threat means you can load up on Josh Jacobs, but I think the lack of a passing threat means you're probably trying to win this game on the ground if you can. If you're the Green Bay Packers. And we just saw the Houston Texans, run the ball 30 times with, for over 150 yards with Joe Mixon. I guess the question is, can we trust Green Bay to actually commit to that? It's really hard to kind of script out how this game goes, just having no sample of Malik Willis in a Packers uniform. He's been on the team for less than 3 weeks. So Jacobs to me is risky. I think if you want like the floor play this week, I think it's Najee Harris, right? Because we talk about how the Chargers want to win that game against Carolina. I think Pittsburgh follows basically the same script as last week, right? It's like if you could bleed out the Atlanta Falcons and you can win that game defensively, you can win that game with limited quarterback play. I think that travels to Denver.
The tough part about this question is that you look at all of the run defenses and the way that they looked in week 1, and these are some great matchups. These are props. These are definitely prop targets for every single one of these guys. I think Josh Jacobs might have 30 carries this week, though, so I have a hard time getting away from that, and I completely agree. Jonathan Taylor is the one on this list that feels unbenchable. But just a quick nod to Tony Pollard going up against the Jets defense that could not stop Jordan Mason. He was out there looking like Emmitt Smith. And then Najee Harris going up against a Broncos defense that was also shredded by Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. So all of these guys have plush matchups. It's about who you like the most. For me, it's JT and Jacobs. You were on those 2 as well.
Yeah, I mean the volume play with Jacobs is appealing. I get that for sure. It could go very south if this Green Bay offense is just a total train wreck with Malik Willis, which I think is in the cards. But ultimately, I'll tell you this, Bryce, who's our question asker here. These are 4 pretty good options, right? I think you feel better about Tony Pollard coming out of week 1 than you did going into week 1. You probably feel better about Najee Harris. Obviously, once Jaylen Warren works up to a full workload, we'll see. But I think in the short term, you still like Najee there. So you're in a good spot, at least with your roster. All right, we'll do a couple more questions here, and then I got to jump on the Bookies Plus pick show in about 5 minutes here, Brandon. So we're up against it. Gargantuan Monkey Fist says, I was offered Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tony Pollard for Breece Hall. Would you take that in a 0.5 PPR league?
I would not. No? I would keep Breece Hall, but great name.
Okay, there we have it. All right, another question about quarterbacks. Tua or Burrow this week? I would go Tua, I think. There's a long history of these short week Thursday games, going under. So I don't know that we necessarily get a massive points fest, but the way Arizona was able to move the ball on that Buffalo defense, and Miami had kind of like a worst case scenario first half offensively. I think they do break out of that. So I go Tua over Burrow. Godwin or Metcalf? Interesting receiver dilemma here. Seahawks are at the New England Patriots, and the Buccaneers are at the Lions.
I tend to lean DK, just better overall player, number one in his offense, but I love the Godwin matchup this week, so that's a tough call. And I'm with you. Tua is definitely the better option, pound for pound, against Joe Burrow. The Thursday night thing does spook me a little bit, but when the gap is that large between options, I try not to let the dark magic of Thursday night sway me in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I when it comes to DK or Godwin, I think I would go Godwin. I think Metcalf is the higher upside play, but against New England, I think that's just kind of an ugly game. And again, Seattle's not going to start as horrendously as they did in Week 1. But I still think Godwin's the move here. I think that's going to be a game where the Buccaneers are going to have to throw to keep up or work their way back into that game if they fall behind. Again, Buccaneers dealing with some major injuries in that secondary, and I think we could get a high scoring game. All right, well, we'll wrap it up there, Brandon. Up against it time-wise. Appreciate you jumping in this week, helping us work through some start-sit decisions, some rankings, a lot of tough games coming at us in Week 2. You can hear me on SiriusXM Fantasy, 7 to 9 p.m. Central, both tonight and tomorrow. Brandon will be stopping by at the top of Hour 2 tonight. We'll talk more about some of his start-sit dilemmas, more about which games he's going to be betting this week. Brandon, thank you as always. We want to thank our sponsors as well. Underdog, Verse Fantasy, FanDuel. Go check out all those offers. You can see them in the YouTube description. You can see them in the podcast description as well if you're listening to the audio version of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Pod. We'll have plenty more content coming your way on YouTube via the audio feeds as well, so make sure you stay tuned throughout the week. Brandon, thanks again, man, and best of luck in Week 2.
It was an honor to be here. Good luck out there, everybody.